A simple cell phone photo, father, mother, son, and daughter smiling beside their car, ready for a vacation. 2 years later, in a decommissioned storeroom behind a gas station, workers find 4 large, grimy black bags bound with rusted chains, partially hidden behind a clutter of pallets, tires, and boxes. The connection is immediate and deeply unsettling. The gray SUV had been packed since the night before. Marcelo Santos Oliveira had spent nearly an hour arranging the luggage in the trunk, trying to fit 2 large suitcases, the children's blue backpack, and a cooler filled with sandwiches Patrícia had prepared. It was late January 2009, and summer was at its peak in Florianópolis. The heat was already clinging to the skin at 7 in the morning when the family gathered in the garage of their townhouse in the Trindade neighborhood. 9-year-old Sofia carried her pink water bottle and a small bag with games for the trip. Gabriel, 2 years younger, couldn't stand still, running circles around the car and asking every 5 minutes if they could leave yet. Patrícia was checking her purse for the 3rd time. Driver's license, car registration, the reservation confirmation for the inn in Gramado, a credit card, and an envelope of cash for expenses. The idea for the vacation had come up at Christmas. Marcelo had worked as a refrigeration technician for 15 years and had never taken more than 3 consecutive days off. Patrícia, an administrative assistant at a dental clinic, also needed a break. The children were thrilled at the prospect of seeing the Serra Gaúcha mountains, especially after seeing photos of the decorated town on the inn's website. It was the first long trip they had ever taken together as a family. The route was planned. They would take the BR 101 highway heading north. They would pass through the somber town of Paulo Lopes, continue to Torres, then take the BR 290 towards Porto Alegre, and finally the BR 116 to Gramado. About 6 hours of driving, accounting for stops and traffic. The forecast predicted isolated showers late in the morning, but nothing that would spoil the trip. At 7:10, Marcelo started the engine. Patrícia took the passenger seat, Sofia settled in behind her mother, and Gabriel sat on the right, his seatbelt fastened tight. A country song played on the radio as they pulled out of their residential street and headed toward the center of Florianópolis. The Saturday morning traffic was still light. A few people strolled along the sidewalks, shopkeepers opened their doors, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakeries. For the first few kilometers, the conversation revolved around their itinerary. Patrícia had researched tourist spots online. Minimundo, the stone cathedral, the covered street, the charming local cafes. Marcelo was more interested in the mild mountain climate and the chance to go hiking with the children. Sofia wanted to see the artisanal chocolate shops, while Gabriel was excited by the promise of riding the tourist trains. When they reached the BR 101, the traffic picked up. Trucks laden with cargo rumbled towards Rio Grande do Sul. Tourist cars with license plates from different states vied for space on the road, and the sun was already beginning to heat the asphalt. Marcelo adjusted the air conditioning and turned on his phone's GPS, which estimated their arrival in Gramado for 2 in the afternoon, assuming normal traffic and a stop for lunch. The first hour of the journey passed without incident. The children were distracted by the passing scenery. Patrícia organized the travel documents, and Marcelo drove attentively, respecting the speed limits. The car was running perfectly. He had it serviced 2 weeks earlier, the tires were new, and the tank was full. Everything pointed to a smooth trip, the kind the family would remember fondly for years to come. At 9:20 a.m., they passed through the toll booth at Paulo Lopes. Marcelo paid the fee, tucked the receipt in the glove compartment, and drove on. The traffic was normal for a summer Saturday, and the weather held steady with a few scattered clouds on the horizon. They still had 5 hours to go, but the family's excitement remained high. No one could have imagined that their vacation would become one of the most disturbing cases in the region's history. The gas station in Sombrio appeared like an oasis on the highway. It was 10 a.m., and although they had been on the road for less than 3 hours, Gabriel was already complaining of thirst and Sofia needed the restroom. Marcelo decided on a quick stop to refuel, stretch their legs, and buy some treats for the kids. The place had the typical feel of a roadside stop: 2 rows of pumps, a convenience store with glass walls, a few truck drivers having a snack at an outdoor counter. Patrícia took the children to the restroom while Marcelo filled the tank. The attendant, a young man in a blue uniform, cleaned the windshield and checked the oil. Everything was normal with the vehicle. When the family regrouped in the convenience store, Sofia chose a pack of cream-filled cookies and Gabriel grabbed a juice box. Patrícia bought water for everyone and a bag of peanuts for Marcelo. The payment was made by credit card at 10:05 a.m., as shown on the receipt she carefully placed in her wallet. Before getting back on the road, Patrícia sent a text message to her sister Andrea, who lived in São José. "Stopped in Sombrio. The kids are loving the trip. If the mountain pass is clear, we'll get there early." It was a reference to the weather conditions in the Torres and Osorio area, known for its mountain ranges and fog that sometimes disrupted traffic. Andrea quickly replied with a heart emoji and asked them to send pictures from Gramado. The second leg of the trip began in high spirits. Gabriel had stopped complaining after his juice. Sofia was flipping through a children's magazine they had bought at the station. Patrícia commented on the landscape, which was gradually changing as they neared the border with Rio Grande do Sul. The banana plantations gave way to taller hills and the vegetation grew denser on the slopes beside the highway. Around 11 a.m., they began to notice heavier clouds on the horizon. The car radio reported a chance of light rain in the Torres area during the afternoon, but it was nothing to worry experienced travelers. Marcelo slowed down slightly when he noticed the traffic had increased. Several cars with plates from various states were heading in the same direction, likely tourists like them taking advantage of the late summer to visit the Serra Gaúcha. At 11:30 a.m., as they were passing a rural area between Torres and Três Cachoeiras, Patrícia sent the last message that would ever reach its destination. The text was simple and optimistic. "If the mountain pass is clear, we'll get there early," she typed quickly while Marcelo concentrated on the road. Her phone showed good signal coverage, and the message was delivered normally to Andrea, who was having lunch at home with her husband and 2 young children. What no one knew was that this would be the family's last communication with the outside world. From that moment on, all electronic traces, all records, all concrete clues would simply vanish. It was as if the gray SUV and its 4 occupants had been swallowed by the road, or transported to a parallel dimension where no monitoring system could reach them. The region between Torres and Três Cachoeiras had its own particularities in 2009. It was a transitional zone between the coast and the mountains, with sections of the highway under construction for expansion, temporary detours, and spots with poor signage. Many drivers, especially those unfamiliar with the route, ended up making unplanned stops to get their bearings, consult maps, or simply wait for better visibility when the fog intensified. The weather was beginning to turn. The clouds that had seemed harmless in the morning were now gathering more menacingly, and a cool breeze from the ocean carried the moisture that often enveloped the region on summer afternoons. It was exactly the kind of weather that made prudent drivers seek temporary shelter until conditions improved. And it was in this context, in this window of time between the normality of a family vacation and the beginning of a mystery that would last for years, that the Oliveira family vanished from the face of the earth. The BR-101, near Três Cachoeiras, had a peculiar flow that Saturday afternoon. Road expansion work created bottlenecks that forced drivers to slow down, and the fog that began to form around 12:30 made the situation even more complex. Experienced truckers switched on their beam lights. Tourists eased off the accelerator, and some vehicles pulled over to find a safe place to wait for better visibility. At 12:25 p.m., according to regional meteorological records, a cold front from the ocean met the warm continental air directly over the area between Torres and Osorio. The result was a dense fog that reduced visibility to less than 50 meters in some stretches. It wasn't an emergency, but it demanded extreme caution from drivers. Many took the opportunity to stop for a coffee and wait for the weather to clear. The gas station at kilometer 89 of the BR 101 was a well-known landmark for regular drivers on that route. It wasn't a large establishment, but it offered the basics: fuel, a convenience store, restrooms, and a covered area where travelers could shelter from the rain or fog. The place also served as a support hub for truckers, with a washing bay and a mechanic's workshop for roadside emergencies. During the 2000s, this station had features that would catch the eye of anyone familiar with the area. Beyond the commercial section facing the highway, there was a rear area dedicated to washing heavy vehicles and storing equipment. It was an older structure, built in the 1980s, an annex with facilities that included a drying room, storage for cleaning products, and a maintenance bay that operated erratically, depending on demand. The main entrance to the station faced the BR 101, but there was a side access that led directly to the truck wash area. This entrance was used mainly by drivers of heavy vehicles needing to clean their rigs before continuing their journey, or by fleet owners with monthly maintenance contracts. On weekends, especially in the afternoon, this area was usually deserted, with only 1 or 2 employees working the shift. At 1:40 p.m. that January afternoon, a security camera installed at a business near the gas station captured images of a dark vehicle turning into the service entrance. The recording quality was poor and the license plate was unreadable due to the angle and the persistent fog. The time was logged automatically by the system, but no one paid any special attention at the time. It was common for vehicles to use that access on a weekend. What made this image significant was the temporal context. At 1:40 p.m., the Oliveira family should have been continuing their journey on the BR 290 towards Porto Alegre, according to their original schedule. However, the adverse weather and slow traffic from the roadwork could have completely altered their plans. Stopping to wait for better visibility would have been a sensible decision for any responsible driver. The area where the vehicle was recorded was partially hidden from the main highway. It was a space used for maneuvering trucks, with a concrete floor, a few shade trees, and facilities including high-pressure hoses, washing equipment, and storage containers. On weekend afternoons, when commercial activity slowed, that section was practically deserted. The fog that blanketed the region between 12:30 and 3 o'clock p.m. created a natural curtain, limiting visibility and making any activity in the back of the gas station virtually invisible to anyone passing on the highway. It was the kind of weather that, combined with the isolated location of the washing bay, could facilitate actions meant to go unnoticed. And it was during this window of low visibility that the last concrete visual record was made of a vehicle that might have been connected to the family's disappearance. After 1:40 p.m., no other camera along the BR 101, BR 290, or BR 1116 recorded the passage of the gray SUV with the Florianópolis license plate. It was as if the vehicle and its occupants had simply evaporated into the fog of that summer afternoon. Andrea Almeida was preparing lunch when she received her sister's last message. It was 11:30 a.m., and she smiled as she read it. "If the mountain pass is clear, we'll get there early." She replied quickly with a heart emoji and went back to chopping vegetables for a stew. It was typical of Patrícia to send these updates during trips, always wanting to keep the family informed. At 4 p.m., Andrea tried calling her sister. The phone rang several times and then went to voicemail. She found it a little strange as Patrícia always answered her cell, but she figured they might be in the middle of checking into the inn or strolling through the center of Gramado. She decided to wait a little longer before trying again. Her husband remarked that they probably had no signal in the mountains or were busy with the kids. Around 6 p.m., Andrea tried again. This time, Patrícia's phone didn't even ring, going straight to voicemail. She tried calling Marcelo's cell and got the same result. A knot of worry began to form in her stomach. She called the inn in Gramado and spoke with the receptionist, who confirmed the reservation but informed her that the family had failed to check in at their scheduled 6 p.m. arrival. By 7 o'clock that evening, a genuine sense of dread had begun to set in for Andrea. She called a few of the family's close friends, but no one had heard from them. She tried Patrícia's and Marcelo's phones again, with no success. The inn's receptionist said she would hold the room until 10 p.m., but after that she would have to release it to other guests. It was high season and there was a waiting list. Throughout Saturday night, Andrea stayed awake, trying to make contact. She called every hour, always with the same result. The phones were out of service or went straight to voicemail. Around 2 a.m. on Sunday, she began to consider the possibility that something serious had happened. It wasn't like the family to simply disappear, especially with 2 small children. Patrícia was extremely careful and always kept in regular contact during their trips. On Sunday morning, Andrea made the decision to contact the authorities. She drove to the São José Civil Police Station and reported the disappearance. The officer on duty listened attentively, noting every detail, but explained that they had to wait a full 24 hours before a person could be officially classified as missing. Even so, he advised her to check the hospitals in the greater Florianópolis region and to also contact hospitals in Torres, Osorio, and Gramado. The phone calls to the hospitals began that same Sunday. Andrea and her husband divided the task. She called every emergency unit in the Florianópolis metropolitan area, while he contacted hospitals along the route the family had planned to take. No incidents matching the family's description had been registered. No traffic accidents, no emergency room visits. Absolutely nothing. Monday arrived with no news. Andrea returned to the police station and formally filed a missing persons report. She provided all the data, physical descriptions of each family member, the vehicle's characteristics, the license plate, and the details of their last contact. The investigation began with standard procedures, communicating with police departments along the route, checking hospital records, and consulting toll booth systems. The first concrete lead emerged on Tuesday. The investigator confirmed that the family had passed through the Paulo Lopes toll booth at 9:20 on Saturday morning. The proof was in the electronic records, and the toll booth's security cameras clearly showed the gray SUV with the matching license plate. They also managed to trace a credit card transaction in Sombrio at 10:05 a.m., confirming the family had stopped for gas and supplies. After that, however, there were no more electronic records. No credit card use, no cell phone signals, no passage through other tolls. It was as if, from 10:05 in the morning in Sombrio, the family had vanished from the digital world entirely. The investigator explained to Andrea that this was extremely unusual in this day and age, especially considering Patrícia's habit of maintaining regular contact via her cell phone. On Wednesday, federal highway police teams began searching along the BR 1001 highway between Sombrio and Torres. They scoured the roadsides, checked secondary access roads, spoke with gas station attendants, and interviewed truck drivers who regularly traveled that route. The initial searches focused on the possibility of an accident where the car had gone off the road, considering the region had some dangerous stretches and the fog could have contributed to a fatality. For a week, the search intensified. Firefighters, civil defense, and local volunteers mobilized, combing secondary roads, riverbanks, and forested areas near the highway. They used search dogs, drones, and helicopters. The operation was one of the largest ever conducted in the region to locate missing persons. But the result was always the same: not a single trace of the family or their vehicle. The gas station at kilometer 89 of the BR-101 was open 24 hours, but the flow of customers varied drastically between shifts. During the day, especially on summer weekends, it was common to see tourist families stopping to refuel, truckers grabbing a quick meal, and local merchants buying items from the convenience store. At night, the traffic dwindled considerably, limited mainly to long-haul drivers and a few vehicles using the truck wash area. The establishment's physical structure was a tale of two different eras. The front section facing the highway had been modernized in the early 2000s with electronic pumps, an automated payment system, and a well-lit store with a wide range of products. The back, however, retained features from its original 1980s construction. High-ceilinged sheds, a concrete floor with industrial drainage, and white-tiled walls yellowed with age, with plumbing designed for washing heavy vehicles. The truck wash section functioned as an extension of the main station, but operated with a degree of independence. It had its own side entrance, a maneuvering area for trucks, covered bays with high-pressure equipment, and an adjoining room that served as a locker room for employees and a storage space for cleaning supplies. During the week, 2 or 3 employees typically worked in this area. On weekends, especially during the afternoon and night shifts, only one person was responsible for the section. Carlos Enrique had worked in the truck wash between 2008 and 2010. He knew the routine of the place well, including its peculiarities at different times of the day. According to him, it was common for some customers to use the back parking area to wait for better travel conditions, especially during heavy fog or rain. The space was large, offered shelter under the covered bays, and was set back from the highway traffic. During the initial investigations in 2009, Carlos was interviewed by investigators. He reported that in late January of that year, there had been a few episodes of nighttime activity in the wash area that had caught his attention. Vehicles would enter through the side, remain parked for varying lengths of time, and then leave without using any of the services. At the time, he mentioned it to the station manager, but was told not to worry as they were likely just drivers waiting for better weather. What intrigued Carlos most was the pattern of this activity. It usually happened between 2 and 5 in the morning, always on weekdays when fewer people were working at the station. The vehicles would enter without their high beams on, park in a specific area near the storage shed, and leave just as discreetly. He had seen this happen 2 or 3 times during January, but was never able to identify the car models or their license plates. The annex room in the truck wash section served a specific purpose. It was used as a locker room for employees, a storage area for cleaning chemicals, and occasionally as a temporary holding place for equipment needing maintenance. It measured approximately 4 by 6 meters, had a single small window facing the station's inner courtyard, and an access door that was normally locked when no one was working in the sector. The room's floor was covered with 20 by 20 centimeter white tiles with dark grout, making it easy to clean up chemical spills. In the center, an industrial drain was connected to a system that carried waste from the wash to a settling tank before disposal. The walls were also tiled up to a height of 2 meters, and above that the white paint showed signs of dampness and mold over time. Lighting was provided by two fluorescent lamps on the ceiling, but one had burned out in early 2009 and had not been immediately replaced due to the room's infrequent use. A single 60-watt incandescent bulb hanging from a wire in the center of the room served as emergency lighting. The result was a poorly lit environment, especially at night when no natural light came through the small window. Over its years of operation, the room had accumulated various objects related to the washing activities. Plastic buckets, hoses, cleaning products, rags, and a few old tires used to weigh down tarps. Wooden pallets were used to keep chemical products off the damp floor. Over time, these items had piled up in a disorganized manner, creating a makeshift storage space. It was in this very room, 2 years after the family's disappearance, that workers would make a discovery that would change the course of the investigation forever. The security camera that recorded the dark vehicle entering the side of the gas station was positioned on the roof of a mechanic's shop located on the other side of the BR 101. The equipment had been installed in December 2008, following a series of thefts in the area. It mainly covered the shop's parking lot, but its viewing angle partially included the gas station's gated entrance. The shop's owner, Joaquim Ferreira, only became aware of the recording's importance 3 weeks after the family vanished. Civil police investigators had mapped all security cameras within a 2-kilometer radius of the station and requested access to recordings from late January. Joaquim cooperated immediately, providing the digital files stored on his monitoring system. The image quality was far from ideal. The equipment was a basic model with limited resolution, and the distance between the camera and the station's entrance resulted in small, poorly defined images. Furthermore, the fog that had blanketed the region that afternoon reduced visibility even more, creating a whitish haze that made it difficult to identify specific details. Even so, it was possible to identify some important elements. At 1:40 p.m., a dark-colored, medium-sized vehicle entered the side of the station at a reduced speed. The exact model was impossible to determine, but its proportions suggested an SUV or a van. The time was automatically recorded by the system, and investigators cross-referenced it with the operations center's clock to confirm its accuracy. The vehicle remained out of the camera's field of view for approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. During this period, there were no other recordings of entries or exits from that same SU entrance. At 3:55 p.m., a vehicle with similar characteristics was recorded leaving through the same entrance. But again, the poor image quality and weather conditions prevented a precise identification. Investigators analyzed the entry and exit footage frame by frame, trying to spot any detail that could confirm it was the same vehicle. They consulted image analysis experts and used digital enhancement software. But the technical limitations of the original recording did not allow for any definitive conclusions. What they could state with certainty was that a dark vehicle had used that entrance at a time consistent with the family's disappearance. The 2-hour and 15-minute window immediately caught the investigators' attention. It was enough time for various activities: waiting for weather conditions to improve, performing vehicle maintenance, having a meal, or even waiting to meet someone. On the other hand, it was also enough time for activities that one would not want to be observed or interrupted. During interviews with station employees, investigators learned that the Saturday afternoon shift was covered by just 2 people: an attendant in the fueling area and a cashier in the convenience store. The truck wash operated on reduced hours on weekends, and no one was specifically assigned to monitor the side entrance during that period. Roberto Silva, who was working as the attendant that afternoon, remembered the fog that had disrupted traffic for a few hours. He said several drivers had commented on the difficulty of driving in low visibility, and some had made longer stops than usual to wait for better conditions. He didn't specifically remember a family with children, but explained that during the fog, many customers preferred to stay inside their vehicles, reducing direct contact with the staff. The station's internal monitoring system had significant limitations in 2009. The cameras primarily covered the fueling area and the convenience store, leaving blind spots in the back region, especially near the annex room of the truck wash. This setup had been designed to protect against theft of fuel and store products, not to monitor activities in the heavy-duty service area. Marcos Antonio, the station manager at the time, explained to investigators that the security system's priority was the main commercial operations. The truck wash was more of a supplementary service, with regular clients on monthly contracts who rarely caused problems. Therefore, there had been no investment in specific cameras for that sector. For the 2 weeks following the disappearance, investigators combed every square meter of the station and its adjacent areas. They used sniffer dogs which had been trained with clothing from the family provided by Andrea. The dogs showed interest in a few specific spots in the wash area but were unable to establish a definitive trail that led to any concrete discovery. Analysis of the wash area's floor revealed traces of various types of vehicles, as expected in a place of heavy commercial use. Forensics technicians collected samples of soil, oil, and other residues, but lab results indicated nothing out of the ordinary. The constant traffic of trucks and other vehicles had contaminated any specific evidence that might have been left by the family's passage. The investigation also focused on the employees who had access to the station that weekend. Besides Roberto Silva and Marcos Antonio, 3 other people had keys to the establishment. The owner, who lived in Capão da Canoa, a mechanic who handled emergencies, and a cleaning employee who worked the night shift. All of them were interviewed and provided verifiable alibis for the time of the disappearance. The mechanic, Valdecir Santos, reported that he had been called out on early Sunday morning to service a truck with electrical problems. But this had occurred around 4 in the morning, several hours after the investigators' window of interest. The janitor, João Carlos, who worked from 2 until 6, confirmed that in the early hours of that Sunday morning, everything at the station had been normal, with no sign of any unusual activity. After a month of intense investigation, authorities expanded the search area, working on the hypothesis that the family might have had an accident on a back road. They launched search operations within a 50-kilometer radius of their last known location. Teams scoured rural roads, checked abandoned properties, ponds, streams, and any place where a vehicle might have veered off the main highway. The community's response was both immediate and touching. Andrea organized a volunteer search party that grew to over 200 people in the first few months after the disappearance. Neighbors, colleagues, parents from the children's school, and local business owners all came together, systematically combing every secondary road between Florianópolis and Gramado. Weekends were transformed into coordinated search operations. Groups of 10 to 15 people were given maps of specific areas to cover, equipped with whistles, flashlights, cameras, and cell phones for communication. They walked down dirt roads, followed trails leading to rural properties, and searched the banks of streams and wooded areas near the highway. Each group was instructed not to touch anything that looked suspicious, but to photograph it and report it to the authorities immediately. Over the first 6 months, dozens of false leads emerged. Drivers called in reporting sightings of an abandoned gray SUV in different locations. Shopkeepers claimed to have seen a family with similar features. Truckers asserted they had seen the car or had witnessed accidents or suspicious situations. Every report was meticulously investigated, but none were confirmed upon closer inspection. The most promising tip came from a gas station in Taquara, approximately 40 kilometers before Gramado. The attendant reported that on the Sunday following the disappearance, a family with children had stopped for gas, and the woman had seemed nervous or frightened. The physical description partially matched the Oliveira family, sparking a 5-day search operation in the region. However, when investigators accessed the station's credit card receipts, they discovered the family in question was from Caxias do Sul and had paid with their own card. Security camera footage confirmed that, despite a physical resemblance, it was not the missing family. The woman had appeared nervous because one of her children had fallen ill during the trip, a detail entirely unrelated to the case. The frustration of these dead ends began to erode the volunteers' morale. Andrea could see that people were growing weary of the fruitless searches, and some began to speculate about alternative theories. Whispers of a voluntary disappearance, of fleeing debts, of hidden family problems, or even involvement in illicit activities that might have prompted the family to change their identities began to circulate. Andrea vehemently rejected these speculations. She had known her sister for 35 years, spent time regularly with Marcelo and the children, and was absolutely certain there was nothing in their lives that would justify a voluntary disappearance. Patrícia was a transparent person, openly discussing financial or marital problems when they arose, and she showed a genuine love for her children. The idea that she would abandon Sofia and Gabriel was simply incompatible with her character. The impact on the children's school was devastating. Sofia was in the 4th grade at a municipal school near the family's home, and Gabriel was in the 2nd grade at the same institution. Their classmates made posters, the teachers organized prayers, and the administration authorized posters with the children's photos to be displayed on the bulletin boards. For months, Sofia and Gabriel's desks remained empty, a silent testament to the teachers' hope that they might return at any moment. After a year of searching, the official investigation was scaled back to periodic checks and following up on any new leads that might eventually surface. The investigators did not close the case, but they acknowledged that they had exhausted the technical possibilities available with the resources of the time. The file remained open, and any new information would be investigated immediately. Andrea continued the search independently. She hired a private investigator with her own funds, kept the posters distributed throughout the region, and created a blog where she published updates and asked for help from anyone with information. The blog received hundreds of comments and dozens of suggestions, but none led to a concrete breakthrough in the investigation. Throughout 2010, the frequency of the searches gradually decreased. The volunteers returned to their normal routines, the investigators were assigned to other cases, and media coverage became sporadic. The case of the Oliveira family became the kind of mystery people would mention when passing through the area, but one that slowly lost its relevance in the community's daily life. At the end of 2010, nearly 2 years after the disappearance, Andrea made a painful decision. She began the legal process to have her sister, brother-in-law, and her niece and nephew declared legally dead. It wasn't an act of giving up, but a practical necessity to resolve matters related to the family's estate and to close the bureaucratic loose ends that had piled up. January of 2011 arrived with intense rains that battered the entire southern coast of Brazil. The region between Torres and Osorio was one of the hardest hit, with flooding at various points along the BR-1001 highway and structural damage to businesses nearby. The gas station at kilometer 89 did not escape the problems. Leaks in the convenience store roof, water pooling in the truck wash area, and electrical system failures forced a partial shutdown of operations. When the rain subsided at the end of the month, the station's owner decided to take the opportunity to carry out a complete renovation. The truck wash area was to be completely modernized with a new drainage system, new flooring, repainted walls, and more efficient equipment. The adjoining room, which served as a locker room and storage area, would also be renovated as it showed clear signs of moisture and mold that had accumulated over the years. Jose Maria da Silva, an experienced mason with 25 years in the trade, was hired to coordinate the demolition and cleanup. He had worked on several gas station renovations in the region and was familiar with the peculiarities of such facilities. He arrived on site on a Monday morning, accompanied by 2 assistants, to assess the scope of the work and begin removing the materials that had piled up in the room. The first task was to empty the room completely. Over the years, it had become a makeshift storeroom cluttered with all sorts of objects. Expired cleaning products, damaged hoses, cracked buckets, rusted tools, old tires unfit for use, and several wooden pallets stacked haphazardly. Jose Maria began by removing the lighter, more accessible items. Cardboard boxes softened by moisture, empty plastic jugs, pieces of torn tarp. The smell of mold was intense, mixed with the odors of chemicals that had been stored there for years. The single working light bulb cast shadows that made it difficult to identify the objects piled in the darkest corners of the room. When he reached the pallets stacked at the back, Jose Maria noticed they were heavier than usual. Some seemed to be resting on objects he couldn't clearly identify. He asked his 2 assistants for help to remove the pallets carefully, as the wood was damp and some boards threatened to break. It was as he was removing the 3rd pallet that Jose Maria saw something that made him stop cold. Underneath the wood, partially hidden by tires and boxes, were large, dark objects that were definitely not part of a gas station's normal inventory. He told his assistants to stop working, and they approached together to get a better look at what they had found. There were 4 large bags made of heavy-duty black plastic, the kind used for industrial waste or transporting heavy materials. They were tied at the top and had metal chains wrapped around them, as if someone had taken special care to keep them securely closed. The material of the bags was dirty and showed signs of having been there for a long time, with moisture stains and some spots where the plastic had deteriorated. The size and shape of the bags immediately caught Jose Maria's attention. Each measured about 1.5 meters in length and had considerable volume, as if they contained heavy, bulky objects. They were arranged in an organized fashion. They didn't seem to have been thrown there randomly. Someone had taken care to position them properly and cover them with the pallets and tires. Jose Maria had worked in construction long enough to know when something was wrong. The way the bags were hidden, the care with which they had been covered, their specific location at the back of the room. It all pointed to a deliberate intention to conceal those objects. He told his assistants not to touch anything and immediately called the station owner to report the discovery. The decision to call the authorities was made jointly. The station owner, Jose Maria, and the manager, Marcos Antonio, agreed that the situation was too suspicious to be ignored. Around 2 o'clock on that Monday afternoon in January 2011, exactly 2 years after the disappearance of the Oliveira family, the civil police were called to investigate what had been found in the abandoned room. The arrival of the civil police utterly transformed the atmosphere at the station. 2 patrol cars parked near the main entrance, and investigators immediately cordoned off the entire back area with police tape. The lead detective, Dr. Fernando Machado, personally took charge of the operation, considering the discovery could be linked to open cases in the region. Jose Maria and his assistants were questioned separately. Each recounted exactly what they had seen and done since the cleanup began. The mason explained in detail the sequence of removing the objects, described the exact position of the pallets, and emphasized that the bags seemed to have been placed there intentionally, not just tossed aside. The investigators noted every word, photographed the scene, and ordered that no one else enter the room until the forensic work was complete. The forensics team arrived around 4 in the afternoon. Photographers documented the scene from every possible angle, Technicians collected samples from the floor and walls, and experts carefully examined the 4 bags without initially opening them. Protocol required that any handling be done in a controlled environment, with proper equipment and in the presence of a medical examiner. Dr. Machado immediately requested a review of the missing persons files from the last 5 years. The Oliveira family case was among the first on the list due to the number of people involved and the specific characteristics of their disappearance. When he compared the dates, he noticed a disturbing coincidence. The family had vanished exactly 2 years prior, and their last confirmed location was a gas station in Sombrio, just 45 kilometers south of where the bags were found. News of the discovery leaked quickly. By Tuesday morning, reporters from local newspapers were already at the station trying to get information. The Civil Police Press Office limited its statement to confirming that suspicious objects had been located and were being examined, but provided no specific details to avoid compromising the investigation. Andrea learned of the discovery through a call from the investigator who had handled the original case in 2009. He explained that he couldn't share details, but that there was a possible connection to her family's disappearance. He asked her to remain available for potential identification of personal belongings, should it become necessary during the forensic analysis. The tension in Andrea's home was palpable. After 2 years of alternating between hope and despair, she didn't know how to react to the news. On one hand, there was the possibility of finally getting answers about the fate of her sister and her family. On the other, there was the terrible fear that those answers would confirm the worst possible outcome. The forensic laboratory in Porto Alegre received the material on Wednesday. The 4 bags were transported in a specialized vehicle with controlled refrigeration, accompanied by 2 experts for the entire journey. The analysis would be conducted with extreme care, following strict protocols to ensure the preservation of any evidence. Dr. Roberto Fernandez, the medical examiner in charge of the analysis, had worked on hundreds of similar cases over his 15-year career. He knew that every detail could be crucial in clarifying not only the identity of what was inside the bags, but also the circumstances that led to this situation. The pressure was immense, especially given the media attention the case had garnered. Preliminary examinations began on Thursday. Using X-ray equipment, the experts identified shapes and densities that suggested organic matter in an advanced state of decomposition. The chains wrapped around the bags were a common model, easily found in hardware stores with no features that would allow for specific tracing. Analysis of the bag fibers revealed it was a resistant industrial plastic, the type used for disposing of rubble or transporting heavy materials. There were no preserved fingerprints due to the long exposure to moisture and the storage conditions. Stains on the outside of the bags were collected for chemical analysis in an attempt to identify substances that might indicate the contents or storage conditions. On Friday, Dr. Fernandez authorized the controlled opening of the first bag. The procedure was carried out in a special room, with a proper ventilation system, personal protective equipment, and photographic documentation of every step. What they found inside confirmed their darkest suspicions. The human remains were in an advanced state of decay, yet they still held features that offered a chance at identification through more detailed analysis. The confirmation that they were indeed human completely changed the status of the investigation. The case was now being treated as a multiple homicide, and a task force was immediately formed to conduct the inquiry with the highest priority. Dr. Machado requested additional personnel, an expansion of the search area around the gas station, and a complete re-evaluation of every clue collected over the previous 2 years. It took 3 days to complete the opening of the 4 bags. Dr. Roberto Fernandez worked methodically, documenting each step of the process and collecting samples for specific analyses. The condition of the remains varied from bag to bag, but all were consistent with a storage period of approximately 2 years, given the temperature and humidity of the room where they were found. The first bag contained the remains of an adult male based on bone dimensions and characteristics. His height was estimated between 1.73 and 1.75 meters, his age between 35 and 40. The second revealed the remains of an adult female with an estimated height between 1.60 and 1.65 meters and a similar age to the first. The two smaller bags held the remains of children, approximately 7 to 10 years old, identified by the stage of their skeletal development. Dental analyses were requested immediately. Andrea provided the names of the family's dentists: Dr. Carlos Mendez, who treated Marcelo and Patrícia, and Dr. Ana Luisa, the pediatric dentist for Sofia and Gabriel. Both professionals cooperated promptly, providing the X-rays and clinical records that would allow for a definitive comparison with the remains. The results of the dental examinations arrived the following Monday. The dental arches of the adults were a perfect match to the records of Marcelo and Patrícia Oliveira. The children also corresponded with the dental charts of Sofia and Gabriel. The margin of error was less than 0.1%, which meant the positive identification was a scientific certainty. Dr. Fernandez was also able to determine certain circumstances surrounding their deaths. The remains showed no signs of trauma from firearms or sharp instruments, but there was evidence of blunt force trauma across different parts of the skeletons. The pattern of the injuries was consistent with high-energy impact, possibly from a car accident or an assault with heavy objects. The absence of clothing or any personal belongings with the remains puzzled the investigators. In cases involving the concealment of bodies, at least some items like jewelry, shoes, or fabric fragments are usually preserved. The complete removal of any identifiable item suggested careful planning on the part of whoever had hidden the bodies in the station's back room. Analysis of the room where the bags were found revealed crucial details. The floor had old stains that, under chemical testing, confirmed the presence of human blood. The stains were concentrated in a specific area near the central drain, and their distribution suggested significant bleeding had occurred there. The tiled walls also bore microscopic blood spatters, mostly at a height between 1 and 2 meters from the floor. Crime scene reconstruction specialists analyzed the spatter patterns and concluded they were consistent with violent impact trauma. The spatial distribution indicated that at least some of the injuries had occurred inside the room itself. The room's drainage system was completely dismantled for analysis. Inside the pipes, technicians found human hair, fabric fragments, and organic residue, confirming the place had been used for a cleanup following an event that involved serious injuries. The amount of material collected suggested a meticulous cleaning had been attempted, but it had not been enough to eliminate all traces. Carlos Enrique, the former employee who had reported suspicious nighttime activity in the Wash Bay area, was called to testify again. This time, his memory of the details was sharper. He specifically recalled a night in late January 2009 when he saw lights on in the attached room around 3 in the morning. At the time, he thought it was odd, as no one was supposed to be working at that hour, but he didn't give it much thought. Carlos's testimony revealed another significant detail. On the Monday following that late-night activity, he noticed the room had been cleaned in an unusual way. The floor was shinier than normal. There was a strong smell of cleaning products, and some objects that were usually scattered about had been neatly arranged. He had assumed at the time that the night cleaning crew had simply done an exceptionally thorough job. The chronology of events began to form a disturbing picture. The family had disappeared on a Saturday afternoon. The last record of their vehicle was near the gas station. A witness had seen suspicious activity in the room during the early hours of the morning, and by Monday the area showed signs of a major cleanup. The interval between the disappearance and the cleaning was approximately 36 hours, more than enough time for someone to plan and execute the concealment of the bodies. As investigators cross-referenced physical evidence with witness statements, a reconstruction of the Oliveira family's final moments began to take shape. The most probable scenario was that the family had indeed stopped at the gas station on that foggy afternoon, perhaps to wait for better travel conditions or due to a mechanical issue with their vehicle. An analysis of the chains found wrapped around the bags revealed important characteristics. They were common galvanized chains, the kind sold in any hardware store, but they showed signs of accelerated oxidation from prolonged contact with moisture and organic substances. The rust pattern was consistent with 2 years of exposure to the room's conditions, confirming they had been used shortly after the family's disappearance. Dr. Fernandez determined that death had occurred from multiple traumas, consistent with a beating or an intentional hit-and-run. The injuries on the adults were more extensive, suggesting they had tried to protect the children during the assault. Sofia and Gabriel had fewer injuries, but they were equally fatal, concentrated mainly on their heads. The pattern of the lesions indicated the use of heavy objects, possibly tools or pieces of metal. The investigation then focused on identifying who would have had access to the room during that period. The list of suspects included station employees, regular customers of the wash bay, people who knew the layout of the place, and any opportunists who might have used the room as a temporary hiding spot. Each person was thoroughly investigated, their alibis checked, and their potential motives analyzed. An important clue emerged from the analysis of fibers found in the room. In addition to the human remains, technicians identified fabric fragments that matched the clothes the family was wearing on the day they disappeared. Patricia's floral blouse, Marcelo's blue t-shirt, the children's clothing, all were found in tiny fragments mixed with organic waste in the drainage system. Most disturbing was the evidence that the bodies had been manipulated inside the room itself. The bloodstains on the floor formed a pattern that indicated the bodies had been dragged from one area to another, likely to make the cleanup and bagging process easier. This suggested that whoever committed the crime knew the facility's layout well and had enough time to carry out the concealment with care. The security camera footage was re-examined with a new perspective. Specialized technicians digitally enhanced the images of the vehicle that entered the side of the station. Although they couldn't identify the license plate, they could confirm it was a dark-colored SUV, matching the description of the family's vehicle. The entry time, 1:40 p.m., corresponded exactly to the period when the family would have been passing through that area. Marcelo Santos, the mechanic who handled emergencies at the station, was called in for another interview. This time, investigators questioned him specifically about his knowledge of the attached room and about anyone who might have requested access to that area during the suspicious period. Valdesir revealed that he had lent the key to the room to an acquaintance a few weeks before the family disappeared. The acquaintance was Sergio Lopes, a 42-year-old truck driver who regularly drove the route between Rio Grande and Florianópolis. According to Valdesir, Sergio had asked to store some tools in the room because his truck lacked a secure compartment and thieves were stealing equipment from trucks parked along the highway. It was an informal but tolerated practice at the station, especially for old and trusted customers. The investigation into Sergio Lopes revealed a troubling history and personality. He had a record of bar fights, illegal firearm possession, and a domestic assault complaint that had been withdrawn by his ex-partner. Neighbors described him as a difficult person, especially when he had been drinking. Some recounted episodes of verbal abuse toward women and children over traffic disputes or trivial arguments. When investigators tried to locate Sergio Lopes, they discovered he had left his job at the transport company in March 2009, just 2 months after the family's disappearance. He told his boss he had received a better offer from a company in Santa Catarina, but provided no specific details about the new job. Since then, no one had maintained regular contact with him. The search for Sergio Lopes expanded across 3 states. Investigators in Santa Catarina, Paraná, and Rio Grande do Sul received search and seizure warrants. They consulted records from transport companies, gas stations where he used to stop, and motels that catered to truck drivers. They also checked his bank transactions, credit card usage, and any activity that might reveal his current location. The investigation was entering a crucial phase. They had solid physical evidence, a consistent timeline, and a suspect with a compatible profile and access to the crime scene. All that was missing was to find Sergio Lopes and get his version of the events. There was hope that, at last, Andrea's family could have the answers they had been seeking for 2 long years. Sergio Lopes was located on a Tuesday in February 2011 in Joinville, Santa Catarina. He was working as a contract driver at a transport yard in the industrial zone, making short trips to the coast. He was approached discreetly by investigators, informed of his rights, and taken to the police station for questioning. Sergio denied any involvement. He said he knew the wash bay area of the station by sight and confirmed he had stored tools in the attached room months earlier, with the mechanic Valdecier's permission. But he insisted that on that night in late January 2009, he was simply sleeping in his truck because of the fog. He claimed he left at dawn and continued his journey without ever entering the room. The task force, however, came to the interrogation with a body of evidence that changed the dynamic. Sergio's former transport company provided the tachograph discs for that Saturday. The record showed a stop of 2 hours and 17 minutes, exactly within the time frame of 1:40 p.m. and 4:00 p.m., at a location consistent with kilometer 89. An image expert enhanced a file from a workshop across the BR 1001 highway. The license plate was not visible, but the truck's cab and deflector matched the model Sergio drove at the time. In Osorio, the day before the disappearance, a hardware store confirmed the cash purchase of a galvanized chain and a padlock with a simple handwritten receipt. The employee recognized a middle-aged, dark-haired truck driver, and the owner had jotted down the partial plate numbers of a trailer, which were consistent with the fleet of Sergio's former company. When confronted, Valdecier admitted to lending the key to the room a couple of times, and that one of those times was just days before the disappearance. There was no formal record. It was just an arrangement between acquaintances. Still, direct evidence was scarce. The bags, the chains, and the environment had been degraded by time and humidity. Any useful fingerprints or biological profiles had been lost. The public ministry requested temporary detention to deepen the investigation, conduct a reconstruction at the station, search old motels and workshops where Sergio frequented, and seize his tools and clothing. The court granted the request. The reconstruction, carried out on a humid morning, was compelling for the investigators. Based on the drag marks and microscopic spatters, forensic experts showed how someone with a key and knowledge of the place could enter through the side access without being seen from the road. Light the room with the single hanging bulb, clean what was necessary by washing it down the industrial drain, and finally hide the bags under pallets and old tires. Sergio watched in slints and maintained his denial. The 30 days of temporary detention turned into preventive detention after another piece of evidence surfaced. At a junkyard in Capão da Canoa, the owner reported having bought a damaged, undocumented dark SUV for cash in early February 2009 from 2 men. The vehicle had been scrapped years earlier, making any forensic examination impossible. The junkyard's logbook mentioned only a nickname for one of the sellers. Cross-referencing testimonies, investigators linked the nickname to an occasional partner of Sergio's on his night trips. That man, however, had died in a motorcycle accident in 2010. Based on this web of circumstantial evidence, the access to the room, the stop registered on the tachograph, the visual match of the truck, the prior purchase of the chain and padlock, the unusual cleanup on Monday, and the clandestine sale of a matching SUV shortly after, the public ministry charged Sergio with qualified homicide and concealment of a corpse. The defense argued the evidence was fragile and lacked a direct link. The case dragged on through supplementary reports, challenges, and appeals. Months later, a judicial decision revoked the preventive detention, imposing cautionary measures instead. He had to report to the court every 2 weeks and was forbidden from leaving the state. The jury trial was scheduled, postponed, and rescheduled. Witnesses moved away, memories faded, companies closed, and files were lost in system upgrades. The case was never officially closed, nor was it ever fully proven in court. Sergio maintained his innocence until the end of the available records. For Andrea, there was no relief, only a different kind of silence. She was finally able to bury her sister, her brother-in-law, and her nieces with names and dates fulfilling the promise she had made to herself. No one will forget. Every year on the last Saturday of January, she drives to a junction on the BR 101 highway, parks her car, and leaves 4 white flowers on a wire fence. Too large, too small. The story of the Oliveira family remains an unsettling reminder on a familiar landscape. Gas stations, rest stops, side roads, places where entire lives can pivot in an instant, completely unnoticed. In the cell phone photo that opens this video, the light is gentle and the smiles come easy. In the image from behind the station, everything is heavy and still. Between the two lies just a few hours on the road and a series of choices whose author we may never know.